She boarded the plane quietly, her dark hair tied back neatly and her clothes casual enough to make her blend in with the other travelers. She carried nothing more than a small bag and a book. Slipping into her seat in row 10 without attracting attention to anyone watching, she was just another woman traveling alone, perhaps on business or maybe visiting family. She leaned back, closed her eyes and let herself drift into the strange stillness of air travel, that half-conscious state where the world outside becomes distant. The flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced smiles, handing out water and pillows. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, soothing most passengers into their own thoughts. The woman in row 10 was no different, at least to the outside eye. Her name was Claire Matthews, and she had once been a combat pilot flying missions over skies where every second demanded alertness and every choice carried weight that could not be erased. But that was another life, one she had stepped away from after years of service, years that left scars she carried silently, though no one on this plane would ever suspect. The captain came over the intercom with the usual pleasantries, thanking passengers for flying, giving the weather at their destination, assuring everyone of a smooth journey. Claire barely listened. Her body still carried the memory of long deployments where sleep came in fragments and vigilance was constant. Now sleep came to her like a luxury, and she welcomed it, letting the drone of the engines lull her deeper. Hours passed without incident until turbulence rattled the plane hard enough to wake her. Passengers murmured nervously while the seatbelt sign flickered back on. Claire opened her eyes immediately, alert though she kept her calm demeanor. She felt the vibration of the aircraft shift ever so slightly, something she would not have noticed years ago but could never miss now. Her instincts sharpened and she frowned. Then the captain's voice returned over the speakers, only this time the tone was different, strained, measured, heavy with something that did not belong on a commercial flight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are experiencing a critical situation. If there are any combat pilots on board, please make yourself known immediately." Claire froze. The words rang in her ears and for a moment she wondered if she had misheard, but the urgency in the man's voice was unmistakable. The cabin went silent save for the nervous whispers of confused passengers. Row 10 suddenly felt like a spotlight burning into her. No one here knew her past, not the flight attendants, not the man sitting in row 11 tapping his laptop, not the young couple 2 seats ahead whispering with worry. She had promised herself she would never step back into that life again, but as the silence stretched on and no one stood, she realized with growing certainty that she was the only one who could answer. Her heart raced, yet her hands remained steady. She unbuckled her seatbelt, slowly rising to her feet. The eyes of those near her turned instantly, surprised, unsure of what she intended. She took a deep breath, walked down the aisle toward the nearest attendant who looked pale with fear. Claire spoke calmly, low enough for only her to hear, "Tell the captain a pilot is here." The attendant blinked in disbelief, then nodded, quickly pressing her intercom. Moments later Claire was ushered toward the cockpit, past the curtain, past the stares of passengers who were now beginning to realize something was very wrong. Inside she found the captain, a middle-aged man, sweat on his brow, and his first officer, tense and pale. Instruments blinked warnings across the panel. The captain looked up, his relief visible. "You're a pilot?" he asked. Claire gave a single nod. "Combat, Claire Matthews, Air Force, retired." The captain exhaled sharply as if some weight had lifted, though his eyes remained grave. "We lost hydraulics," he explained. "Our control is compromised and the first officer has limited experience with emergency landings of this magnitude. If we cannot stabilize, we risk losing the aircraft and everyone on board." Claire's training kicked in. Without hesitation she moved forward, scanning the instruments, absorbing the situation quickly. Her mind sorted through possibilities, calculating what could be done. She was no longer the woman dozing in row 10. She was once again the pilot who had flown through combat skies. She began issuing instructions, her voice firm, precise. The captain listened, following her guidance while the first officer worked beside them. The aircraft steadied slightly, though the danger was far from gone. Outside the cockpit the passengers felt each lurch, each correction with hearts pounding. Some whispered prayers, others held hands tightly, yet none of them knew that the woman who had risen from row 10 now carried the fate of every soul on board. Claire kept her emotions in check, but inside she felt the weight of it pressing down. Memories of her old missions surfaced, moments where life and death balanced on instinct and training. She had walked away from that life because it had cost her too much. Friends lost, sleepless nights, guilt she carried silently, but now those same skills, those same scars were what stood between this plane and disaster. Time seemed to warp in the cockpit. Every second mattered. Claire's voice never wavered as she coordinated with the captain, guiding him through maneuvers she had performed in combat but never imagined repeating here. Over a crowded city with hundreds of civilians in her care, she felt the old adrenaline surge through her veins, sharp, focused, alive. She had thought she would never feel this again, yet here she was saving lives, unseen, unrecognized except by those in the cockpit. As the ground control patched in with instructions, the captain deferred to her judgment without hesitation. He could see in her eyes the clarity of someone who had been through fire before. She was steady, unflinching. When she told him to trust her, he did without question. And as they worked together, the passengers behind the locked door remained in the dark. Some wondered why they had asked for a combat pilot, some whispered that maybe a terrorist threat had emerged, others thought it was a malfunction, but in row 10 the truth lingered empty and silent. Only Claire knew that she had revealed herself after years of silence, and only she knew what it cost her to step forward once more. The aircraft dipped slightly, then steadied again under her guidance. The alarms still blinked angrily across the panel, but Claire's voice cut through the noise, steady and sharp. She directed the captain to reroute power to secondary systems while she recalculated the approach path. Her hands moved instinctively across the instruments. Though she was not seated in the captain's chair, she had never flown this exact type of commercial jet, but to her the language of flight was universal. She read it as fluently as she breathed. The first officer glanced at her with awe mixed with relief. He had seen pilots buckle under lesser crises, yet this woman who had walked in from row 10 spoke with unshakable certainty. Outside the cockpit, passengers clutched their seats, unaware of just how close they hovered to disaster. The turbulence had subsided, but the tension in the air grew heavier with each passing minute. Claire kept her eyes fixed ahead, calculating descent speed, wind conditions, and runway length. They had one chance to land safely. If she miscalculated, if the hydraulics failed completely, the outcome would be catastrophic. She glanced at the captain, who gave a small nod, a silent agreement that she was in charge now. She took a breath, deep, steady, and began guiding them toward their destination. Inside her chest her heart pounded, but her mind was razor sharp. She remembered nights in the desert sky, missiles streaking past her canopy, friends on the radio who never came home. She had lived through fire, she had carried loss, she had sworn she would never fly again, yet fate had pulled her back into the cockpit, not of a fighter jet but of a passenger plane carrying hundreds of lives depending on her courage. As the ground loomed closer, she spoke into the radio with precision, instructing the tower of their emergency status. The runway was cleared. Emergency vehicles lined the tarmac, waiting, lights flashing red and blue. Claire focused, narrowing her world to numbers, speed, altitude, angle of descent. Everything else blurred: the fear, the memories, the passengers behind her. It was just her, the sky, and the machine. The landing was brutal. The aircraft touched down with a thunderous jolt, skidding as the brakes fought against failing systems. The cabin erupted with screams, passengers gripping the seats around them. Claire leaned forward, barking adjustments, steadying the descent until the wheels finally gripped firm. The plane lurched, slowed, and with a final violent shudder came to a halt on the runway. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of passengers sobbing in relief. Claire exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. Now that the danger had passed, she leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The captain removed his headset and turned to her, his face pale but grateful. "You saved us," he said simply. The first officer echoed with a quiet, "Ah, I have never seen anything like that." Claire gave a tired half smile. "It's been a long time," she whispered. Outside, emergency crews swarmed the plane. Fire trucks and ambulances surrounded them, ready for the worst, but finding instead a miracle. Inside, passengers slowly unbuckled, still stunned at the rough landing but alive. Many glanced toward the cockpit door, wondering who had been called, who had saved them. Row 10 remained empty, the seatbelt still twisted where she had risen. When the door opened and Claire stepped back into the cabin, a hush fell over the passengers. Some recognized her from earlier when she had walked forward, others saw only a composed woman returning from the cockpit. She kept her expression calm, though her pulse still raced. The flight attendant announced through trembling words, "Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of gratitude to Ms. Matthews, a former combat pilot who stepped forward today." A ripple of gasps ran through the crowd, then applause broke out, swelling louder and louder until the entire cabin rang with it. Claire shifted uncomfortably at the attention she had never sought, praise, only survival. But as she walked back to row 10, people reached out, touching her arm, whispering thank you. Some with tears in their eyes. A mother holding her child sobbed openly, telling her she had given them another chance at life. Claire nodded softly, unable to find words. The seat in row 10 felt different now, no longer anonymous, no longer hidden. As the plane taxied to a stop and passengers prepared to disembark, officials from the airline and airport hurried aboard. They wanted her name, her statement, her story. Cameras waited outside, eager to capture the mysterious woman who had landed a plane, but Claire avoided the spotlight. She gave the necessary details, quietly signed the reports, and then slipped away through a side exit while the world searched the main gates for her. Walking out into the open air, she felt the weight of the night settle on her shoulders. She had revealed a part of herself she had locked away for years. She had thought she could leave that life behind, but the truth followed her in every heartbeat. She was a fighter pilot, no matter how much she tried to bury it, and today in row 10 the world had been reminded. Yet as she stepped into the quiet of the terminal she realized something else. A piece of her that had been dormant had awakened. The same courage that once kept her alive had saved hundreds more, and though it hurt to feel the memories surge, she knew it mattered. Perhaps she could not erase who she was, perhaps she was not meant to. That night as she finally left the airport unnoticed, slipping into the darkness, she thought of the faces she had seen, passengers who would go home to families because she had risen when no one else could. The woman in row 10 who had once been invisible was now unforgettable, though they might never know her full story. Claire Matthews, fighter pilot, survivor and quiet hero, had returned to the skies one last time. And for the first time in years, as she stepped outside into the night air, she looked up at the stars and did not turn away.